Today's daf, Be'ezus Hashem, the final daf in Masechta Sotah, is daf Mem Tes. We are beginning on Mem Ches Amud Beis, 2 lines from the top. The Mishnah stated, Mishamesu Nevi'im HaRishayim, when the earlier prophets passed on, they stopped using the Urim V'Tumim. So the Gemara wants to know, who are the earlier prophets? Ma Nevi'im HaRishayim. Who are the earlier prophets? And at their period, the Urim V'Tumim, that's the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol that would answer questions, stopped working. Amar Rav Huna said, Zed David, Ushmuel, Ushloima. That was the prophet during the time of David, Shmuel, and Shloima. Rav Nachman even goes further and says, Bimei David, in the times of David, it worked, but not always. Zimnim Solik, sometimes the Urim V'Tumim did answer questions, V'Similai Solik, and sometimes it didn't answer question. Shaharei Sho'al Tzaddik v'Olsolai. Sho'al Ev Yosef Lei Olsolai. Tzaddik HaKohen would ask a question, and it worked, and he lived in the time of David. But then Ev Yosef asked a question from the Urim V'Tumim, and it did not work. Shnema V'Yal Ev Yosef, and the pasuk describes how he tried to ask the Urim V'Tumim, and it wasn't working in his time. So we see that even in David's times, it worked, but it didn't work so well. So the Gemara asks a question. Mosav Rabba Bar Shmuel asked the question. The pasuk describes in Zechariah in Divrei Yomim, but Vahi Lidrosh Elikim, it's Uziyahu who was asking a question by God. Kol Yemei Zechariah Hamevin Birois Elikim, who understood how to see, so to speak, the God's answer, and again. Zechariah was the son of Yoyada, who was in the time of Yoash. So the question is, this is much long after David HaMelech passed on, and you see they were still working with the Urim V'Tumim. My lab Urim V'Tumim. Don't you think that at that time they were still asking the Urim V'Tumim, even long after David HaMelech passed on? And so the Gemara Loi, that's not what the pasuk means. In that time they were not asking the Urim V'Tumim. They were asking Binviim, other prophets. They were asking other prophets what Hashem messages to us, but they weren't asking a question from the Urim V'Tumim. But here's the final blow. Tashma, come in here. Mishachar Beis Hamikdash Rishon, when the first temple was destroyed, Batlei Arei Migrash, they stopped having cities designated for Levium. Upasku Urim V'Tumim, and after the first Beis Hamikdash, the Urim V'Tumim stopped working. Okay, so there you see it. That's long up until that time, the Urim V'Tumim was working. Anyway, Upasuk Melech Beis David, there was no more king of David HaMelech. If someone will whisper to you, say, if you're telling me that in the second temple the Urim V'Tumim didn't work, but the pasuk says in Ezra when he went to build the second temple, by Yoimah HaTirshasa Lahem. Will not eat the Kodesh Kedoshim until we get the Kohen with the Urim V'Tumim. So the apostle did say that the Urim V'Tumim existed during the second Beis Hamikdash. So the answer to that question is, Emela, you'll answer him, that's not a proof it was going to work. It's like a tongue-in-cheek saying to you, like a person says to his friend, this will happen when Tchias HaMesim will happen. This will happen when Mashiach comes, but obviously it doesn't mean that it's imminent. So, and that the context of that pasuk over there was like a tongue-in-cheek type of statement, but it didn't mean that the Urim V'Tumim was going to be in existence during the second Beis Hamikdash. But what the Brisa does say is that the Urim V'Tumim existed during the first Beis Hamikdash. And then when it was destroyed, that's when the Urim V'Tumim stopped working. So how can you say that the Urim V'Tumim stopped already working during the time of David and Shmuel, etc.? And for the Gemara, Ela Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Ma Nevi'im Rishonim La Puke Mechag Zechariah Malachi Nachroninu. That means that you're right. I'll take it back. During the Nevi'im Rishonim, the early prophets, Shmuel and David and Shlomo, the Urim V'Tumim was working. And when did it stop working? During the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, during the construction of the second, after the first Beis Hamikdash, during the time of Chagei, Zechariah, Malachi, which are the later prophets, that's when it stopped working. The Tanur Rabbanim, rabbis taught, Mishmeisu Chagei, Zechariah, Malachi, when Chagi and Zechariah and Malachi passed on, there was no more divine inspiration, divine spirit to the Jewish people. But Afal Pikein, that means there was no there was no Urim V'Tumim. Afal Pikein, there was like an echo from God when he wanted to give across a message called a Baskol. And here's two stories that indicate that sometimes a voice from heaven comes down, and that's just like a quick message from Hashem. Shepam achas hayumasubim bebeis guria ba'aliyas beis guria b'yerichon. The people were gathering, had a meeting in this base, in the attic of this person called Beis Guria, and it was in Jericho. All of a sudden, a voice from heaven came down during this great meeting with the great tzaddikim at that time, and it said, there is a man who is so worthy that God's presence should be on him, and to be like on a very high level, like a prophet. But the generation, in order to have a great leader, you have to have the generation worthy of such a leader, and the generation's not worthy for him to be on such a high level. So who did they think about was the person? Nasnu Eleim Behillel Hazakin. Everybody turned their eyes to Hillel Hazakin, the old Hillel. They understood that he's the man that God is saying that he's so special that the Shekhinah should have rested on him. Ukishemes, when Hillel died, his biduhu, they gave him a eulogy. Hey Chassid, what a Chassid. Hey Anav, what a humble human being. Talmidei shel Ezra, he's a student of Ezra. Ezra also was a very humble and chassid and a leader. So that's how we see that God, even long after the first base, long after the first base of Mikdash was destroyed, during the second base of Mikdash, already God communicated via a Baskal. Ushum Pamacheres, there was another time, Hayumasubim Ba'aliyah B'Yavne. The people, the tzaddikim, were gathering in a meeting on the Aliyah, on the second floor of somebody who lived in Yavne. All of a sudden, a voice from heaven came down and said, there's one man in this room, that it's worthy that the God's presence should be on him. His generation is not ready for it, or is not worthy of it, or have enough merits to have such a leader. Everybody turned their eyes toward Shmuel HaKatan. They recognized that he's the man that this voice from heaven is calling out. When Hillel died, his biduhu, they gave him a eulogy. Hey Anav, hey Chassid, Talmidei shel Hillel. He's an Anav, a humble person, a Chassid. He's a student of Hillel. Similar to Hillel, except by Hillel, they said Chassid first and then Anav, and by Shmuel HaKatan, they said he's an Anav first and then a Chassid. Anyway, Shmuel HaKatan said at the time of his death something like he had a vision of what the future is going to look like. He said that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed, of course, and then he said Shimon v'Yishmael lecharba. Shimon and Yishmael are going to be killed by the sword. V'chavroi l'ktala, and others were going to be killed in another way. Ushar Amma Leviza, and the rest of the nation will be will be spoiled. Some big events, big stress, big tsaras are going to come to the Jewish people. Va'af al Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, when Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was one of the 10 martyrs of the Sarah Rugai Malchus, Bikshu, when he got killed at that time, Bikshu Loimar Hey Chassid Ve'Hei Anav, they wanted to make him a big Levaya, and they wanted to give him a big hesped of here's the Chassid, here's the Anav. Al Shnit V'Shah, but the hour wasn't right. Shein Maspidin al Harugai Malchus. You can't make they could not make a hesped of those that were killed by the government. It was like trying to make a hesped lahavdol during the Holocaust for a great person that was killed. It wasn't the right time, but they would have made that hesped had he died at another time. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was on such a level. Shmuel HaKatan was on this level, and Hillel is on this level of that they make when they died. They wanted to say about them, or they did say about them. Look at this most humble person. Look at this most devout person, Chassid. Okay, Mishabatel Beis Hamikdash Batel Hashamir. That little worm that was the most powerful little worm that would be able to chisel stones. That shomer that Shlomo HaMelech used to build the base of Migdash, Shnema v'abayis v'ibonasoi eva shlema masa nivna. The house that Shlomo HaMelech built, right? Hadvarim kiksavam. It's exactly the way it's written. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So that means that they didn't raise one piece of metal to it. They didn't raise any equipment to build the base of Migdash. So what did they use as their construction equipment? This little worm that was able to cut stone. So says Rabbi Yehuda. You have to take it literally, that they didn't use any metal equipment in building the base of Migdash. Amalei Rab Nechemia, Rab Nechemia said, "V'chi efshel loimakein." Is it possible to say such a thing? Like Varnema, the pasuk does say that they used a saw called Eila Avonim Yakares Bimagoy Raros B'Magera. They cut it with a saw. So they were using some metal equipment. They weren't just using this worm that was able to cut stone. And came that they didn't, when they were building it, you couldn't hear the sounds of equipment. That means they would cut the stones outside the base of Migdash, and then when it was ready, they would bring it in to the base of Migdash and just put it into place. In other words, the construction of the stones and the shaping of the stones occurred far away from the base of Migdash. And when it was ready, then Shlomo brought it to the base of Migdash and put it in place. But not that they only used that worm to cut the stone. Amar Rebbe said, no, I think they did not use any metal to create the stones of the base of Migdash. Nirim divrei Rabbi Yehuda ba'avnei Migdash. By the stones of the base of Migdash, they did not use any metal tools. The divrei Nechemia, but when Rabbi Nechemia said that they did use metal tools, ba'avnei beisai, to build Shlomo HaMelech's palace, because if you learn Sefer Malachim, it describes two buildings. One, the base of Migdash, and two, Shlomo HaMelech's own palace. For Shlomo HaMelech's own palace, they did use metal tools. So, okay. So now, by the way, so this is based on, the Mishnah says that this Shomer disappeared from existence during the time of the second base of Migdash. So, for Rab Nechemia, according to Rabbi Nechemia, they never used a metal tool to build any of the stones of the base of Migdash. Shamir l'mayasa. Then what was the purpose of having this shamir, this little worm? What did it accomplish? We need it like the Brisa said. In other words, according to Rabbi Nechemia, they probably quarried stones directly from the mine, but they didn't use these, they didn't need the shomer to shape the stones. So that's how the base of Migdash was built, with real original stones. So then what was the shomer used for? The Gedetanya, like the Brisa said, Avonim halalu and kaisum oisum b'diyom. The stones on the ephod, on the avnei shoham, and the avnei miluim of the choshen, there's certain stones they had to chisel. Or engrave the names of the shvatim on it. But the problem is they cannot cause any loss of any stone. It has to be the complete stone. So the Torah tells us that you should engrave the names of the shvatim on the stone. But you're not allowed to scratch with a knife on the stones. It has to be a complete stone. So what do? They would just write the letter of the name of the shvatim with ink, and they would show this worm on the outside how this ink is to follow the ink. And then the stone would split by itself, and nothing would be missing from the stone. So this shamir was like a creature that was like a laser that lasered things to create and form letters. Just like imagine a fig that splits in the summertime. It's not missing anything. Or like this valley, like a valley that splits. There's this crack in the ground, but nothing is missing. So again, the shomer was used specifically. This magic worm was used specifically to create the stones on the breastplate and the names, to engrave the names on the breastplate and the names on the Avnei Shoim and the shoulder stones, but then it disappeared. Now, how did they, when they had the shamir, how did they, if it breaks out of it, if it can eat through anything, so how do you keep it in captivity? Actually, the size of this creature was the size of a barley grain. It was originally, it was existent from the beginning of time. Nothing is too tough for it to break through out of it, to break it apart. So how do they keep it in captivity? They would wrap it in a tufts of wool, put it in a lead tube, full of barley bran. For some reason, I'm not sure how it works, but once you put all this together, the shamar is kept in captivity, and I guess they brought it out when they needed to use it. So this shamar disappeared from planet Earth after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rab Ami said, Mishicharav Migdash Rishon, when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Batla Shira Prandaka. Shira Prandaka is, Rashi says it over here, Shira Prandaka is a type of silk. So this special, beautiful silk doesn't exist anymore. Uzchuchis Levana and white glass doesn't exist anymore. Verechav Barzil and iron chariots. I don't know, the Jews had a secret weapon maybe, and they were using, and when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, all these things went with it. There's congealed wine that comes from Hermon. Like the round figs, like the cakes of figs. In other words, they had this congealed wine, a special type of wine, which was ubiquitous around Israel. Now it's only located in Shanir. So that also disappeared when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Then when the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Mishnah says Neifes Tzufim disappeared. My Neifes Tzufim. What does it mean, Neifes Tzufim? On the Rav said, Soilish Shutsofa Al Gabe Nofam. Rav said that what is Neifes Tzufim, the Mishnah says, is like certain like fine flour that floats on top of the sieve. Imagine a piece of dough that is kneaded with honey and oil. So it was like this floating type of fine flour when it just like it was so silky, so slippery when it was on that sieve. It looked like it was moving. I guess it was full of oil and texture. We don't have the power of the bread that when you stick it onto the sides of the oven, imagine those ancient ovens where you stick things on the side of it, when they would blow up, they would inflate so much that one would touch the other. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar Zedvash Haba min Tzipiyah. This is honey that comes from Tzipiyah. So again, this beautiful honey, this special type of honey, doesn't exist anymore. My mashma, Hidim Rabbi Yari of Sheshes, Kama the Natsa Briyasa Vishakti Baraima Alma, Umaisi Dufsho Meisa Tura. Like bees spread all around and they fly around. They spread out and fly all over the world and bring honey from mountainous plants. So that's a targum to a pasuk, and so we see that Tzipiyah means the honey that comes. Neifes Tzufim means a honey that comes from this high up place, and there's some special honey that comes from this place. What this all means that since the second temple was destroyed, the flour, there's no special type of flour, or there's no special type of bread, and there's no special type of honey. This is all reference that of the sweetness of Torah disappeared, became diminished when the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. It was a different type of learning during the second Beis Hamikdash. Nan we learned over there. Once we're talking about honey, Every nitzuk is tar except the honey from zifim and sapichem. What does that mean? So if you look over here, when you pour something from, let's say this, the top one, this top barrel is pure, and it goes into a barrel that's tummy. So you would think that only the barrel on the bottom is tummy. Here is on the screen, right? Only barrel is on the bottom is tummy. But if you're pouring this special knife, the vash tzifim, the honey from tzifim, so then even the top barrel will become tummy if it was not tummy from before. Why? Because when you stop pouring, the honey that was even touching the bottom barrel it was so thick it will come back into the top barrel. So therefore, kol hanitzik tar, when you pour one thing from one to another, the stream is tar. Chutz midvash zifim v'tzapichim, from the honey of zifim and tzapichim, that stream will make the top keli tamei. My zifim, what does it mean? The zifim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, what does it mean? Honey from zifim. Dvash shemav zifim by. It's such thick honey that you could fool people with it. It means it's so thick that you could just add water to it and it still tastes the same. Rab Shlakish Ama Ashem Mekaimai. It's called dvash from the place called zifim. Zif v'talim babalas. The name of the place called Zif. They had Rabbi Yochanan or Shlakish had a similar argument on the taich of zifim. The pasuk describes in Tehillim, "Bevoy hazifim," the people from Zif, vayem l'shaol alei David. So who is zifim? So pashut, it means a name of the place. But Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, b'nei adam hamazayfin divreim, people who deceive with their words. In other words, zifim were people who deceived Shaul HaMelech. And they said to Shaul HaMelech, if you want David, we can bring him to you, we can give him over to your hands. Though that was a deception because they really could not. So they're called Zifin, not that they're from Zif, but that they're people who deceive. Maybe the word deceive comes from Zif. Rabbi Yochanan, the Zifim is the name of a place. Zif, Vitalim, Ubalas. Okay. Now, New Gemara. Upaski Anshe Amana. When the second base of Migdash was destroyed, there's no more people of faith. Omer Rabbi Yitzchak, Elu b'nei Adam she'ein ma'amina b'Kadosh Baruch Hu. These are people who have real faith in God. In other words, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Rab Lazar Hagadol Omer. Rab Lazar says, "Kol mi sheyesh lo pas b'saloi." If a person has bread in his basket, it means he has what to eat today. But he says, "Ma oichel l'macha." He's worried about what he's going to have for tomorrow. Ein el miktani amuna. He's from the small people of faith. Because he's thinking small. If the God who provided him for today certainly will provide him for tomorrow. So what the Gemara is saying is that when the people became more worried about their parnasa, about their sustenance, following the destruction of the second base of Migdash. So it stopped people of real men of faith. Rab Lazar says, why does it say in the pasuk, Mazal yoim Katnus, who will plunder for the day of Kitanos? What does that mean? So we darsh in the pasuk, Mi garm letzadikim she's bazbe shulchane laasad lavai. Who caused the tzadikim that their table laasad lavai will be plundered? When they get to the next world, they'll see they have less olam haba. Why? Mi gazet lebazl yom, for that special day, they'll see that they're missing things. Why? Because katnus shuhei behem shloiminu ba'kadosh baruch hu, because they were small. They didn't have faith in God. They were worried. And people who are worried a lot, not only they ruin themselves on this world, they're also taking away from their reward on Olam Haba. A man of true faith is not worried so much about parnasa. If he has what to eat today, right, then he shouldn't be concerned about tomorrow, because the same creator that provided today will provide for him tomorrow. Rava says, what is kimi vaz liyom ketanas? The Gemara is darshing this pasuk of Zechariah. Basically, Rav is going to say that sometimes a Rasha, God punishes the Rasha and makes that the Rasha's child, this Rasha's baby, should die to bring about some atonement. But then when the Rasha gets to the next world, God is punishing the Rasha. So the baby comes to God and says, why are you punishing my dad? I died young so that he should have an easier time when he gets to the next world. And because of that, God stops punishing the Rasha. So Rava says, Elu Katanu B'nai Yisrael, B'nai Risha Yisrael. These are the small children that are the sons of the wicked of the Yisrael that died young. In order, we go to the top of Mentes Amrav, they rip up, Rashi says, the psak. They rip up the edict of their fathers in the future world. Because when their fathers get to the next world and they're starting to throw the dad into Gehenna, so to speak, the kid says, I'm in Lefanim, they go to God, Rabbanu Shalom. Since you're going to punish my father, why did you knock out their teeth by causing them the death of me? So when God hears that, he says, okay, you're right. And so to speak, takes their father, although he was Rasha, out of Gehenna. Omar Rabbi Ilo ben Bar Yevarechia. Rabbi Ilo said, David, if it wasn't for the prayer of David HaMelech, all Jews would have like a degrading way to make a parnasa. They would be selling something disgusting, repulsive, like fats. And, they'll have a schmaltzy clothing and the kind of stuff that only poor people get involved in. In other words, the Jews would be very poor peddlers. But David HaMelech prayed that Jews should have a parnasa of dignity, like we say and we pray in the benching. Shenama, we see in Tehillim, David prayed for Jewish people. Shisha Hashem Moir Lechem. God sent for them that they should have some sort of administration. The pasuk says before that God will not forget the poor person. The hope of Aniyam Toivad will be lost. Of the poor people will be lost. God, please send for them some administration. That means send some dignity to them in the way the Jewish people make parnasa, so the goyim should know that we're humans, we're not gods, and they'll be aware that when humans are not gods, we work hard to make a living, and the reason why we have a good parnasa is because God provides. If it wasn't for the prayer of Chabakut, the poor Talmidei Chachamim will be in one cloak, because Talmidei Chachamim would live in utter poverty. That two Talmidei Chachamim will need to share one cover. Shnema Hashem Shemati Shemecha Yoresi Hashem Palecha Bekerev Shnoim Yechaneu. You say to Eibishter, I heard your report and was afraid. Revive your work in the midst of the years. So what does it mean? Al tikra b'kerev shonim, ela b'karev shnayim, close, two people close. So ha'olcha refers to God's handiwork, which refers to the Torah, which would have been b'karev shnayim, that two people that the Talmud Chacham should have been living in such utter poverty. God protects the Talmidei Chachamim that because of the prayer of Chabakuk, the Talmidei Chachamim don't live in total abject poverty. V'omer Rabbi Ilo bar Revrechecha, Shnei Talmidei Chachamim mahalchem b'derech ve'ein b'neim divrei Torah. You have two Talmid Chachamim who are walking on the road, and there's not conversing in divrei Torah. Ru'uyin lisarev. It's appropriate for them to be burned alive. Lisarev be'esh, burnt in fire. Shenama, the pasuk says, there was a chariot of fire and horses made of fire when Elisha and Eliyahu were walking, but they were speaking as they were walking. So the Tanakh tells us because they were speaking, they didn't get burned. Tama the ikadiba, because they were speaking, and probably they were speaking about learning. But if they were not speaking, sorry, if they were appropriate for them to be burned alive. Rabbi Elah bar Yerechia said, you have two great Talmidei Chachamim that live in one city. And they can't work out arrangements with the halacha to come to an agreement. They're constantly divisive. Then echad meis, one is going to die by accident. The echad goyla, and one's going to go into exile. What it means is, as Rashi explained, that the one Talmud Chacham is going to kill the other Talmud Chacham by accident, and because of that, he's going to the Talmud Chacham that remained alive is going to have to go in Golus. Shenema loner shama reitzeach asher yirtzach es re'ehu bavli das. If the place of Ari Mikla was a place where a killer would be able to run because he killed his friend bavli das without awareness. Ve'ein das al Torah means without the awareness of Torah. Shenema nidmu ame bavli das. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So basically, he was trying to encourage Talmidei Chachamim, two great Talmidei Chachamim who are living in one city. They should come to terms to work out with arrangements with each other to be able to live in peace and harmony. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'rei Rav Chia. Rav Yehuda Chia said, "Whole Talmud Chacham oiseh b'Torah metoichat kach." Any Talmud Chacham, and this is a very important statement. What he's trying to say is, if you want somebody to pray on your behalf, so how do you know who to go to? A Makubal, a great tzaddik. You find a Talmud Chacham that's learning Torah in abject poverty, and you're guaranteed that if he prays on your behalf, his prayers will get answered. That's what he said. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'rei Rabbi Chia. Whole Talmud Chacham oiseh b'Torah metoichat chak. Any Talmud Chacham who's learning Torah because of financial distress, tefillas nishmas, God accepts his prayer. Shenama. Gi'am b'tzian yeshiv Yerushalayim. Gi'am b'tzian yeshiv Yerushalayim bochal esifka chonayin yachancha lekol zakach k'shem osoi anoch. That means that God will be able to answer these people. Uksiv b'asrei v'nason shem lechem tsar umayim lechatz. He will give them a sparse bread and scant water. So basically, Ambetzi and Yeshiv Yerushalayim refers to a Talmud Chacham who is learning Torah. He says, don't cry because God will surely answer you. And when he hears you, he will answer you. So, and what the type of person who's learning in Yerushalayim? A person who's learning because he has lack of bread and scant water. So, and that Talmud Chacham that is learning under financial distress is such a person that God heeds his prayer. Rabbi Bo says, must be an oisim is. He's satiated with the shine of the presence of God. Shenema your eyes will see. There's a pasuk that continues there. Your eyes will see your teacher. He, so to speak, when he learns under financial stress, somehow he'll feel God is teaching him and learning with him at the same time. He won't feel all alone. And then the pasuk says, the curtain is not closed before him. The secrets of Torah are not hidden from him. Your teacher will not hide from you. So he'll be able to learn on a very, very high level. So if a Talmud Chacham who learns under financial stress shouldn't feel so bad, should feel that God is more closer to that person. God hears his prayer. God's presence is close with him, and the secrets of Torah will be revealed to that person. The Gemara continues. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Mishum Rab Shua Yom Shachar Beis Hamikdash. When the Mishnah said, from the time that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there's no day that the curse is not greater than the previous day. Amar Rava explained, the curse of one day is greater than the previous day. Shenama, because the pasuk says, during the morning hours, you'll say, I wish it was night, and at night, you'll say, I wish it was morning. Hey, Boiker, when you say it's night, you wish it was morning. Which morning? You wish it was tomorrow's morning. Do you know, do you know tomorrow is going to be better? How do you know? Because you're referring to the day previously. When the nighttime comes and it's terrible, you'll wish it was the previous day's morning, which was better. So we see that everything is the world is progressively getting worse. So the question is, if the world is progressively getting worse, why does it stay in existence? Why does planet Earth stay in existence? So the Gemara says, Akadusha de Sidra, because people say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh during Gavalat Zion. It's like a mini type of learning that everybody does as a group, the Jewish people. And this miniature type of learning that we say in davening, that at the end of davening, we finish davening, we just say that Siyum, which is like everybody learning together, the world stays in existence. And the answering Yehei Shmei Rabbah of the after people learn and come to a shir on Shabbos, they would, after the learning, they would say Kaddish Rabbana. Because of those two things, the world stays in existence. Shenema, because the pasuk says, "Eretz Eifosah k'moy Eifel Tzamavis v'lo Sodarim," a land of thick darkness as darkness itself, a land of shadow of death, without any order. If there was no order, Hoyesh Sodarim, if they had the order of the Kadosh, 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 Tefiyah Me'Eifel, it will shine from its darkness. Then the pasuk said. Then the Mishnah said, "V'lo yored tal lebrocha v'nitel tam peres." Toshma, come in here. Tanya, we learned in the Brayser. Shimon ben Elazar Oima. Tahara. When they stopped in the second base of Migdash, stopped being noyeg b'tahara, bitl tam v'reach. There was no smell. There was no good taste and fragrance from the fruits. Masa, when people start giving masa, bitl shuman dagam. It was the nourishment of wheat went down, was nullified. Rashi says, because people prior to that, they would conduct themselves with purity. God would purify their fruits from a bad smell and a bad taste. The Gemara tells us, Rav Huna ashkach tumrarta de chinusai. Rav Huna found this date that was very fragrant. Shekala karcha b'sudura. He wrapped it up and took it home in his cloak. Also Rabba Berei. So his Rabba's son came home and he smelled. Amale, he said, Marchina recha de chinunisa. I smell such a fragrant date from you, my father. So Amale. So Rav Huna said, Beni, you could smell it. Tahara yesh b'cha. You must be a pure person. Yavanele, he gave it to his son. Now, when he gave it to his son, he meant that his son should eat it. Adahachi asa Abba Mar Brei. Abba, the grandson of Rav Huna, which is the son of Rabba, came home. Shekala. So Rabba took the date that he got from his father Rav Huna, Yavanele, and gave it to his son Abba. Amalei. So Rav Huna told his son Rabba, Beni, my son, Simachtes libi, you made my heart happy, because when you smelled the fragrant date, I see what a pure person you are. But I meant that only you should have it. Kisa Shani, but you knocked out my teeth by not eating it yourself, but rather you gave it to your own son. That's what people say. Rachmi da Abba Abanei. A father's mercy is on his son, but it doesn't work in the reverse. Rachmi b'nei, the mercy of a son, Abanei da Havale. He's more in love with his own children than in love with his own father. More merciful on his own children than his father. The Gemara continues. Rav Acha bar Yaakov itapel bei bar Reb Yaakov bar Barate. Rav Acha bar Yaakov, for whatever reason, he had to raise the son of his daughter. Rav Yaakov, the son of his daughter. So Rav Yaakov was the son of his daughter. So he raised his grandchildren. Maybe his daughter's husband died. So Rav Acha was raising his grandson Yaakov. He Godal, when this Rav Yaakov grew up, Amalei Ishkayimai, the grandfather who raised him, said, please give me a drink of water. Maybe he meant to interrupt his learning. And Amalei, so the Rav Yaakov answered his grandfather, Lav Richanach, I'm not your son. I don't have to interrupt my learning to be able to serve you water. So the Gemara says this story. Reve, you can raise a kid, you raise a grandchild, but he's only still your grandchild. So don't get so into your grandchildren and expect them to reciprocate all that you do for them. That's what it is. The Mishnah continues. Ba'pulnish shel Espionus, during the war when the Espionus came onto the Beis Hamikdash, onto Yerushalayim, but it didn't destroy the Beis Hamikdash. So then Gazru al Atares Chasanim Bal Iris. They made a gzera that in the Chasanim, the grooms should not wear this crown anymore. And Iris, we'll see what that means. So, in other words, what the Gemara Mishnah is describing over here, that progressively, as things got worse for the Jewish people, they started making edicts and laws that the people no more fancy stuff. Bapulna shel Titus, when the army of Titus came for the first time, Gazru al Atrois Kalas, that the bride should not have a crown. Vishalo Yalamin as Benoy Yavanis, and a person should not teach his son Greek. Balpulmes or Achroin, when the final blow came and they destroyed the base of Migdash, Gazru Shaloi Teitze Kala Ba'apiryon. They made a rule that a kala should not go out with a palanquin, in the city. I'm showing it to you on the screen over here because this is a palanquin, and this is how they would bring the kala from her home to the chasana hall. But they permitted the kala should go out on this palanquin in the city because of tznius. In other words, when the kala left the home, she was in this palanquin, and probably the curtains were closed, so that was okay. But rabbis, even though it's pompous, but there was a certain element of tznius there, modesty, and therefore the rabbis said it's okay. Now the Mishnah describes when certain great Tanoim died, it was an end of an era. Mishemes Rameir, when Rameir died, Batlu Moishli Mishalem, there was no more, it was nullified, those that were able to give parables in their speeches. Rameir had good life experiences, and he was able to give great parables to explain himself. Mishemes Ben Azai, when Azai died, Batlu Hashakdonim, the people who were so dedicated to Torah, was nullified. In other words, Rabban Azai was a tremendous masmid, and in fact, that he never got married because he was so enwrapped in the Torah. The Mishnah continues. Vishameis ben Zaima, when Zaima passed on, Batlu Hadarshanim, the people who were able to darshan each pasuk ceased to exist. Vishameis Rabbi Kiva passed on, Batlu Kavari Torah, the honor of the Torah was ceased to exist. In other words, Rabbi Kiva had this special, unique way of learning that even the crowns and the letters he learned halachas from. I'm not sure what, but even the way, the shapes of the letters, he was able to demonstrate that there are certain halachas to be learned from that. When we learn from every nuance of the Torah something new, something that shows the honor of the Torah, that nothing is written, for no reason. Mishemes Rabbi Chanina ben Doisa, Rabbi Chanina ben Doisa passed on, Batla ad Shemaisa, great people who can perform great miracles cease to exist. Mishemes Rabbi Yossi Katainta Posca Chasidim. When Rabbi Yossi Katainta passed away, the great Chasidim ceased to exist. And he was the Lama Nikra Shmai Katainta. Why was he called the small one? Shoyi Katainta Shachatim. He was the smallest of all the Chasidim. And so when he passed on, there was nothing smaller than him. Therefore, that idea of a Chassid ceased to exist. Mishemes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai passed on, Batul Ziv HaChachma, the shine of Chachma ceased to exist. Interesting that Rashi says, Ziv HaChachma, Ze lo yadana mahi. I don't know what the shine of intelligence seems to means. Ziv HaChachma, it's not clear. Mishemes Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken, Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken passed away, Batul Kvoid Torah, the honor of a Torah ceased to exist, because during the time of Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken, people used to stand when they were learning. Umesa, and when he died, people sat down when they were learning. Umesa Tahara Uprecious. When he died, people stopped keeping Tahara, purity, Uprecious, separation. People were uncareful. They didn't mind getting themselves tamei. Race Rabbi Shmuel ben Pabi, but Laziv Kahuna. When Rabbi Shmuel ben Pabi passed on, the shine of Kahuna passed away. So Ziv Kahuna, because he was a Chacham, an Usher, and he had many Kahanim eating at his table. Mishimeis Rebbe, when Rebbe passed away, Batal Anava, humility ceased to exist, Yiras Chet, and fear of sin. There was nobody as fearing of sin as Rebbe was, the fear of doing an Avera. And that type of person ceased to exist upon the passing of Rebbe. The Gemara says, Rav Pinchas ben Yair says, Nishachar Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Mishnah describes over here. Certain things that terrible things that happened. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Boishi Chaverim, the Talmidei Chachamim was shamed. Ubnei Chayrim, people who learned Torah, were shamed. V'chafu Roshim, they had to cover their heads. V'nidaldele Anshe Maisa, and they kept it. It became less and less people who did good deeds. The Gavru and Gavru Bali Zoira and Bali Zroya, people who are violent, got the upper hand. Ubali Lashon, people who are smooth talking, got the upper hand. These were the leaders of the Jewish people. The Ein Doirish, no one was able to daven. Vein Mevakas, Vein Shoel, no one able to request and ask from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and pray on behalf of the Jewish people. The leaders were very in poor stature. Almi loni lihishaim. So who does the average person have to lean on? If there was no great leaders anymore, Alavina Shabashmaim, only on the Father in heaven. Rab Leza Hagadol Omer, Rab Leza Hagadol says, Yom Shachar Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Sharu Chakimaya Lehevika Safraya. There was things started to go down. The Chachamim of previous generation looked like scribes. The Safraya Kechazanaya. And the scribes became like the Gabbai and Shul. The Chazana in the Gabbai and Shul's Kama Da'ara became like an Amaretz. Ama Da'ara and the people of the land, we go to Amid Beis, Osla came, Vidaldula, and it continued to become diminished. The Ein Shoel De'im Avakish, nobody can ask and request anything from God. So again, the leaders and the people that you looked up to became low in stature. So Almi Yesh Lo Shoim. So who can we rely on? Alavina Shabashmaim, on our Father in heaven. I guess if you view God as your Father in heaven, so then anybody could pray. You don't need that prophet anymore during these terrible times. Be'ikvasa Mashiach, on the heels of Mashiach, you'll see that maybe Bizman Azeh, chutzpah yasker, there'll be a lot of increase of chutzpah over here. And during, not only by the Jews, even by the Goyim. You can see it when they're burning American flags. V'yoker ya'amir, and everything will be very, very expensive. There will be increased inflation, which you see that now. Even yeshiva tuition is up. Agef and tit imperia. There'll be a lot of wine. The grapes will be able to give forth its fruit, v'hayayim b'yoker, but wine will be expensive because people are drinking. They're addicted to drinking. Umalchus tehafech minus, and the government will turn into minus. Minus is like liberalism, extreme liberalism. Ve'in techachas, and nobody can give rebuke. Beis vad yiliznos, there will be special meeting places for immorality. Usually in previous generations it was hidden. Now it's out in the open. Va'galil yacharav, the north part of Israel will be destroyed. Va'gavlim yisham, this place called Gavlim will remain desolate. The people of the borders who are uprooted from their homes in Gaza will they will be going from place to place, and nobody will show them any mercy. The chachma soifrim tisrach, the wisdom of the scribes will spoil. The yirechet yimasu, those that fear sin will be repulsed. The emes tehei ne'ederes, and the truth will be divisive, because people will say during the time of Mashiach, I have the truth, you have the truth. So it will be divisive in what the truth is. Na'orim bepnei zakenim yalbinu, the teenagers will shame and turn the faces of an old person white. They'll shame the older people. Zakenim yamdu b'pnei ketanim. This you can see. Old people will, when the small man and when the small person enters the room, he'll stand up for him. Ben menavel av, a son will shame his father, disgrace his father. Bas kama be'ima, the daughter will stand up against her mother. You see, kala b'chamoisa, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. You see that, unfortunately, how even in families, people are not talking with each other. Ish anshe basically, the enemies, the greatest enemies of a person will be his family. Pnei Hadar, the Mishnah continues, it says that Pnei Hadar, the face of the generation, the leaders of the generations, kipnei kelev, will be like the face of a dog. The dog looks like, when you walk a dog, it looks like it's in front, but when it gets to a certain place and it doesn't know where to go, it turns back to its owner and tries to get an indication it should go left or right. So the leaders of the generation are not going to be leading; they'll be turning back around to the people to see what their opinion is and what direction they should go. And a son will not be embarrassed from his father. What can we rely upon? Just pray. There's the Father in heaven that will have mercy. So it'll be a very sad world, very different world during the times of the heel of Mashiach. So the Gemara continues and will end off soon. Amar Rav said, we said that when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, or during that time period, that the Chassanim were not allowed to go around with a crown on their head. Eloishanu Elashal Melach, it was made of crystal, the gofris of sulfur. Avashal Hadas, Vishel Vered, if it was made of myrtle or of roses, mutter, then it's permitted, that type of crown. Ushmul Ama Afshal Hadas Vishel Vered Asa, if it was made of hadassim or roses, it's asa. Shal Konim, if it was made of reeds, Vishal Chelas mutter, if it was made of reeds or bulrush, it's mutter. In other words, it shouldn't be such a fancy hat. Apparently, the Chassanim had fancy hats. The Levi says, Af shall konim v'shal chelas asar. All the of the reeds and the bulrush are asar. Use a crown made of reeds and bulrush is also asar. So Levi was very strict after the Beis Hamikdash. Not to that the Chassanim should not wear these crowns. Bala Iris, my Iris, they when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, they stopped everybody from doing Iris. My Iris is a type of instrument that was like a bell type of instrument, maybe like a bell type of instrument that made a loud clangy noise. Amar Ablaza Tavlo Dechad Puma. It's a bell that has one mouth to it, or a drum with one mouth. Rabba Bar Avhuna, the Gemara says, Rabba Bar Avhuna Avad Le Lebrei Tambura. Rabba Bar Avhuna made for his son a tambir, a tambourine. So he made for his son this, right over here. And it has bells to it, so maybe he was upset about it. So Asa Avua, the father came, Tavari, and broke it. Avhuna came and broke this tambura. Amalei Michlef Betavlo Dechat Puma. People will say that if you're allowed to use this tambura, you're going to be using a tavlo Dechat Puma. You're going to use a bell with one mouth to it. Zil Avidle Apuma Dechat Sava Apuma to keep vazay. Go make, if you're going to go make this this drum on the mouth of an earthen jug or on the mouth of a container used for measuring kafitza. In other words, make it very ugly or not as nice as this tambura, and then you can have it. Bepalmulas shel Titus gazru al atris kalais. When the army of Titus came in, they made an edict that the crown of kalais, the women should not wear a crown. My atris kalais, Amar Rabba Bar Chona, Amar Rav Yochanan, Ir shazav. The women used to go out with a golden city type probably on their forehead. With a gold piece of jewelry with the picture of Jerusalem on it. Tanyanami Hachi Ezu Atris Kalis. What is called an Atris Kalis? Ir Shazav, a city of gold. Aval Oisan Oisa Kipa Shalmilas. They're allowed to make a hat which is made of fine silk. Tana, we learned in a brisa. Af al chupas chasanim chasanu. They said that there should be no canopy for a chasan. What do you mean? There's no canopy? Yeah, of course, you have to have a chuppah. My chupas chasanim, they used to have fancy ways to make weddings. Zulhairis hamuzahavis. You mean they would make a canopy with golden strands inside of it? Tanyanami hachi eluhen chupas chasanim zulhairis hamuzahavis. They had gold. They had these talesem. That was the chuppah, but they have strands of gold running through it, and that held it up. Aval oisa papyrus. You're allowed to make it out of papyrus. V'toilim by kol mashisa, and then hang whatever you want. Basically, they had a big fancy way to make a wedding. But as the Beis Hamikdash was getting destroyed, they made gezeres, don't make any of these fancy weddings, don't make any of these fancy affairs, and don't spend so much money on this chuppah, because the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Now the Mishnah has taught us that when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, they made a rule that your person should not teach his son Yavanis Greek. What does that mean? Tan Rabbanim. When there was a siege, there was a civil war between the two families of Chashmonai, one with each other. The two brothers were fighting. Hyrcanus was outside the city, and Aristobulus was inside the city. This was a Jewish civil war. Every day, they would lower down a basket full of coins from the wall, and the one on the outside, Hyrcanus's army, would give them a sheep to bring up into the Beis Hamikdash. This was during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. So again, some Jews were in the city, some Jews were out of the city, but you have to bring the carbon tamid, and there was a siege. So for the carbon tamid, the people on the inside of the city would lower down coins to purchase animals so that they could a sheep, so they could bring the carbon tamid. There was this one old person. He knew the wisdom of the Greeks. And he spoke to them in Greek wisdom, in a Greek puzzle type of way. And he told the people on the outside, right? As long as the people on the inside, the Jews on the inside, are still doing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, ein nimsar b'yedchem, you'll never win this war, because they have the power of the Beis Hamikdash and the power of the carbon tamid. Lemachar, the next day, shilshul lahem dinarim bekupa, the people on the inside sent down in a basket full of coins, v'halu lahem chazir, and because of the advice of this old man who knew the wisdom of the Greeks, he told them to basically send up a pig. And that's obviously can't be brought in as a carbon. And so basically tried to stop the people from the inside, or prevent the people from the inside from bringing any karbanos. When the pig got to half the wall surrounding the Yerushalayim, it got to half the wall, it stuck its nails or claws into the wall. Nizda'aza Eretz Yisrael Abba Me'ez Parsa. The whole Eretz Yisrael shook. 400 parsa of Eretz Yisrael had like an earthquake. And that was a terrible, terrible thing. As the civil war was going to go on forever and ever, but once you start breaking down the religion and breaking down the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, so Oisha Amru, at that point they said, Ora Adam Shigad Chazir, accursed is the person who raises pigs. And curses the person that teaches his son the Greek wisdom. And that hour we learned, on that year was taught Maisa. There was such a shortage of food that they had to bring the oimer carbon. They had to go to this place called Ganai Srifin, and the Shtei Lechem, which was Shavuos time, they didn't have wheat. They had to go to Bikas Ein Soichar to get wheat to provide for the Beis Hamikdash. This was a destructive civil war that affected the economy and affected the food supply. So we see from there that you could not, that they could not, they were geyser that you should not teach your son the Greek language. So the Gemara says, "Any, that's not so." Rebbe said, in Eretz Yisrael, why should you speak the language of Sursi? What is the language of Sursi? It's very similar to Aramaic, and Rashi says it's like the Gemara Lashon, Yerushalmis. People were talking Aramaic in Eretz Yisrael, and Rebbe said, why should you speak that language? If you want to come up with the language, Elai Lashon Kodesh, Elai Lashon Yavanis. It sounds like, when the foundation of the state, they had to decide on a language, whether it would be Yiddish or Hebrew. So in Rebbe's time, they also had to define the language of the country. So Rebbe said it should not be Aramaic. It should be either the language of the state of Israel should be Hebrew or Lashon Yavanis or Greek. So you see, Rebbe was a proponent of speaking Greek. Rav Yosef said, why in Bavel were they speaking? Rav Yosef said in his time, or Rabbi Yossi said in his time, even in Bavel, why should they should speak Aramaic? You should speak either Hebrew or Lashon Parsi or Persian, or like those that came from the old country. Either they spoke Yiddish or they spoke Polish or they spoke Hungarian. But they spoke of they want Jews to speak in a fancy language, and somehow Aramaic wasn't fancy enough. So the Gemara says you're right. There's nothing wrong with speaking Greek. Lashon Yavanis l'chud, v'chachmas Yavanis l'chud. That what they were geyser was that the people should not learn the wisdom of the Greeks. You could speak the language of the Greeks, but the wisdom of the Greeks, they felt that influenced this old man to come up with this terrible, terrible idea. So the Gemara says, chachmas Yavanis miasira. Is it prohibited to learn the wisdom of the Greeks? Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel. Rav Yehuda said, "Name Shmuel, Mashum Reb Shimon Gamliel." My diksiv. Why does the pasuk said? So Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said, a comment, I had a family of 1,000 cousins. Chamish Meis, 500 cousins, lamdu Torah, learned Torah. Chamish Meis, lamdu, 500 were learning chachmas Yavanis, the wisdom of the Greeks, medicine, whatever they were learning at philosophy. So Valensteyer, and after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and all that remained of my great family was just me and my cousin who's living in Asia Minor. It's like the Holocaust Survivors Guild. He said, look what happened. But you see in his comment that he said that I had cousins that were learning the wisdom of the Greeks prior to the destruction of the temple. So how can you say that there's something wrong with learning the wisdom of the Greeks? And says the Gemara, Shanu shall base Rav Gamliel the Kroivin Lamalchus Hoya. The house of Rav Gamliel, they were involved in government, so they had to know the wisdom of the Greeks to be able to converse with the goyim that they encountered. In Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Besape Karmi, people who take these goyish type of haircuts, Harezim Medarche Mori. That is like the Chukas Goyim, and one is not allowed to take such a koimi haircut. But the Gemara says, the Brisa says, Avtulis ben Reuven, hitira lehem l'saper koimi. They permitted him to take this koimi haircut. Shu karv lamalchus, because he had to walk in the government circles. So they allowed him to, because for the sake he was lobbying on behalf of the Jewish people. So they allowed him to take this funny type of haircut. Shebeis Ran Gamliel hitir lehem chachas mivanis mavnei shekroivin lamalchus. The house of the family of Rav Gamliel, they allowed them to learn the wisdom of the Greeks because they were close to the king, and therefore they were also working in government. So they gave them a special dispensation. However, a regular person should learn the Chachmas of Torah rather than learn the Chachma of the Greeks. Torah Bonam. Again, the Gemara, the Bryce is elaborating on what we learned in the Mishnah of when certain Tanoim died. It was an end of an era. Mishamesh Rabbi Eliezer passed away. Nigna Sefer Torah, the Sefer Torah was hidden away. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer knew everything of the Sefer Torah. Kol Torah Kula. Let's see what Rashi says. He had the whole Sefer Torah right in his fingertips, so he was able to bring up anything as if he's reading it from a book. Mishamesh Rabbi Yeshua passed away. Batala Eiso Machshava. It ceased to exist. Anybody who has good thoughts and is able to give good advice. Mishamesh Rabbi Akiva passed away. Batal Zroya Torah, the arm of Torah ceased to exist. Nistatmu Mayanis Hachachma, and the well springs of wisdom closed up. Mishamesh Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Again, Rabbi Akiva was able to darshan every nuance of the Chumash, even the crown that's on top of the letters in the Sefer Torah. Mishamesh Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. When the rich Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah passed away, Batlu Atros Chachma. We never saw somebody who was such a great Talmud Chacham, a great Chacham, have so much wealth. Shenema Ateres Chacham. The crown of a smart person is Ashram if he's wealthy. because usually very, very smart people are not wealthy. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a person who had wealth and he had tremendous chachma. When the miracle worker Rav Chanina ben Doisa passed away, Batlu Anshi Maisa, it ceased to exist anybody who could perform miracles like Rav Chanina ben Doisa. Mishameis Abba Yosi ben Ketainta, Batlu Chasidim. When Abba Yosi, the son of ben Ketainta, then when he died, then there was ceased to exist Chasidim. He was the smallest of the devout people who go above the letter of the law. When he died, since he was the smallest one, there was no real chassid anymore. You never saw that kind of a person. Mishmeis ben Azai, when Ben Azai passed away, Batlu Hashakdonim, the ceased to exist somebody totally dedicated to learning. He was a tremendous masmid. Mishameis ben Zayman, when Ben Zayman passed away, Batlu HaDarshanim, people who were able to darshim psukim and read halachas and find the source of a halacha from psukim, that ceased to exist. As we said in the Mishnayos, they knew they had to say the Krishma and mention something of Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, and they didn't know where do you see it in the Torah. And Ben Zayman darshan from a pasuk, so he found a source. Mishameis Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, when Rav Shimon ben Gamliel died, Olu Goiva, pestilence, the grasshoppers came and did. There was a plague of grasshoppers, Rabatzars, and stressful times increased. Mishameis Rebbe, when Rebbe passed away, Huchpalu Tsaras, the stressful times exponentially increased. Mishameis Rebbe, the Mishnah says, when Rebbe passed away, Batla Anova V'Yiras, it ceased to exist a humble person and a person who had fear of sin. So Rebbe was the last of the humble people. Amalei Rabbi Yosef said, Latana to the Tana, Loi Tisna Anova, don't say that there's no more humble people. The Ikana, I'm humble. In other words, it's not true, because I learned from Rebbe and I'm also humble. So that didn't cease to exist. There are still humble people around even after Rebbe passed away. Amalei Rav Nachman said to the Tana, don't put fear of sin into the Mishnah. The Ikana, because I have also fear of sin. Probably he didn't mean as much as Rebbe had, but I can be called somebody who is a yiras chet as well. And they wanted to say that it's not an end of an era when Rebbe passed away. You're still able to work on your humility and fear of sin even after Rebbe passed away. So Hadranullah Egla Rufa, Mislikallah Masech the Sotah, Mazal Tov everybody, Hadranullah Masech Toyrim, Hadranullah Daitallah Masech Toyrim, Daitallah Snashim Masech Toyrim, Snashim Lemal Madame, Veloim Bahalma Ada Ateh.